Guys. Gals. Happy snowy Friday. Okay, well, congratulations. Good job on putting together what I think is a really meaningful recommendation to support professionals in the field. I know a lot of work went into that. A lot of asynchronous work went into that on top of your regular jobs. And so I personally am grateful to be connected to all of you and the work that you're doing. So first of all, just kudos and congratulations to all of you for getting that across the finish line. That feels really good. I did just put our kind of the old Jamboard that we had used as I'll drop it in here again, just in case anyone came in after I put it in there. It just had the list of ideas that we had generated. And I think based on the guidance from Debbie that this membership panel, panel membership will meet through the end of, or through June. And then the new panel will meet starting in July. And many of you may continue on in your role as a panel member. So it'd be great to have that continuity, but I want to be really respectful of that kind of endpoint and just note that we kind of have this month and then April, May, and June to continue our work in the working groups. And really wanted to open it up to you guys that what feels like meaningful time spent. Again, you all are very busy leaders in early childhood, and this is a great group to generate ideas, to take existing ideas across proverbial finish line, like we did with the retention bonus, as well as just bring stuff to the full panel and say, this needs to be elevated. This needs to be a discussion. So I think we have great latitude in how we spend our time and what we take back to the full group. So I will stop talking and let you guys elevate ideas.
Hey, Sarah, this is Amy Gottchammer. Can I speak for just a moment?
Absolutely, please.
So I sit on the Kansas Association for the Education of Young Children board, and we just recently had our public policy forum at the national level. It was virtual, but everything was happening in Washington, D.C. And so this week we've had a couple of meetings with our U.S. representatives and senators. And so we had meetings, not directly with them, but with their legislative assistants. And so I sat in on a meeting with Representative Ron Estes' office and with Senator Moran's office yesterday. And we did take the opportunity to talk a lot about what the needs were for the workforce, as well as for children and families in Kansas. And I felt that we got a very good response from Ron Estes' office and a fairly good response from Senator Moran's office. Ron Estes' office seemed really on board. More than I have ever heard from his office before, talking about appropriations and getting money in for us, maybe not as much as we had hoped, but getting more in CCDBG and PDG than we have had in the past. So that's great. Recognizing that early childhood care and education is good for our economy. Both of their offices seem to recognize that. I found that Senator Moran's office was taking a slightly different track in that they thought maybe more of the money needed to come from big business rather than from the government. And we tried to share thoughts that maybe because early childhood, really is a continuum from prenatal through grade 12, that, that all of that brain development happens before age 5 and yada, yada. And that if we want success in K through 12, we really ought to subsidize it as much as we do K through 12. So we kind of put that out there, tried to get them to think in terms of this is a full continuum and we really need as much support and subsidies in these early years as we do in the K through 12. We didn't get any commitments, of course, but we kind of threw that out there that this is the message. But they both did very much understand that this was an economic concern for the state of Kansas as it is for the entire country. They both understood that we are effectively at a point where we have childcare deserts in metropolitan areas, not just in rural areas, that we have programs that are open but have entire rooms that are closed because we don't have staff, so that even though we are open, we effectively have fewer spots in our communities than we ever have before, things like that. So we brought all of these problems to their attention, and I do think we will see more money appropriated for us in fiscal year 2023 as there's finally are starting to put 2022 to bed. And that 2023 will see more money coming to us. But I think we have to keep doing whatever we can to drive the point home that the workforce is really critical in keeping our doors open and keeping these spots available so that the rest of the workforce in general can get to work. That they have to have us to keep the rest of the doors open in our state. So I just thought I would share that with you guys, that that we are making sure that at the highest levels of our government, that we make sure they know that this is really critical work that we're doing and that impacts the economy for sure. And because they understand bottom line, they understand money and dollars. And so that's kind of the approach that we took.
That's great, Amy. Thank you for that work to elevate the conversation. I'm curious if you had any resources that you shared, particularly connecting, you talked about the economic case and they understand that. If you had resources that you used that we might be able to share with other panel members as they're thinking about conversations that they might also be having, just to continue driving home some of those consistent messages that you found to be resonating with our federal delegation or a couple members of our federal delegation. Oh, great.
NACY does have some fact sheets that might be interesting to you guys. I put one in the chat. I'll look for a couple of others while we're talking, and if I find some more that might be helpful. But this is just sort of a down and dirty 2-pager that's got lots of numbers and statistics that might be helpful. I know Childcare Ware's got, so there's several of them. Let me look through what we've got. They've got a number of resources there for us, so I'll see what I can find real quick and stick up there for you.
Thank you, Amy.
I can add, Amy, so thank you for sharing all of that. Part of the work that my boss does is connect with our state and federal legislators as well, and trying to use his resources or whatever as an advocate, to be an advocate. And so he's met with both offices that Amy mentioned. And so part of me is wondering now in terms of the messaging, when you say that their thought is that it's more business, with our model, he is a businessman who has chosen to invest in early child education. And so, and there is an effort at a federal level or nationally, there is an effort to try to get more businesses to invest, because it can't just be federal. And if businesses realize that it impacts their workforce, then they actually should have a stake in the game and they should actually do more to invest. But he's also talked about also the need for increased CCDBG and increase, whatever. And so he's trying to kind of marry both messages so that businesses need to see that it's important for them. They can't have a thriving workforce if their people don't have any place to take their children. He's also using our longitudinal study to be able to help them kind of see how this is eventually going to help future workforce as they invest in early child education and students long term. And so So it seems like the right conversations are happening, at a federal level. I was hopeful that we would see change in 22, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen, or not to the extent that we would want. But I'm pleased to hear that now, in continued meetings or whatnot, there's still that support, because he kind of got the same vibe, maybe that they were very supportive of the work that we're all doing and the need, and the importance of early child education, when really it is necessary for a thriving economy and thriving for businesses to thrive as well.
I think there's one thing that we talked about, and I don't know if this is something we might maybe want to tackle. We talked a little bit about wages and compensation and living wages and the pay parity and all of that. And we've talked about what does that number look like and how do we justify, when they say that they're going to give us X number of dollars more, we say, well, that's great, but we need more. Well, what does more look like? And if we want to give them a justification. So, for me personally, I took my salary scale and I ran numbers and I said, based on, a $15, say I put my entry level people at $15 an hour and I gave my degreed teachers based on experience and education, pay parity with the public schools, kindergarten teachers, etc., give them the same wage. I would need $250,000 a year more, which I obviously am not going to put on the backs of my families, but I would need $250,000 a year more to make that salary schedule work. So if we in some way, and I have no idea how that we would do this, but if we could find a way to generate those numbers, either in local levels or at a state level, maybe it's, a volunteer survey or I don't know, something that we could then give to them. I said, would that information be helpful to you? And I actually only had this conversation with Senator Morant's legislative assistant, but he said, yeah, any kind of numbers you guys want to give us, we would always be happy to have. So I don't know if that's something we want to kick around. Maybe that's too big a project and maybe it doesn't generate any interest to anybody, but it was interesting to me to see how far short I'm falling of meeting that mark.
I definitely think that's data we need, Amy, because when we're thinking about, my thought automatically went to this group needs to work on a wages program next. We did the retention bonuses. That's not taking the place of an overall wages program. That's what we need to work on. But we need to know that stuff before we can start to form a wages program, because we need to know how much money we need to have in it to fund it for a year before we even start talking about where that money is going to come from. I have been thinking about this for a while. It's like, 85 million, that's kind of just what's been floating around in my head. But to hear you say you would need at least 250,000 annually to support that, and how many childcare providers we have across the state, it might be significantly higher than 85 million. And we don't know.
We don't. Yeah. And of course it's a moving target. It would totally depend on the education background, and with more and more people just pulling out of early childhood entirely, or taking their degrees and moving to the school district, we're left with a less educated workforce all the time. So that number may go down because they're less qualified. They simply aren't degreed anymore. And we just have less of them. So it would be a bit of a moving target, but I think we could generate something that would have meaning.
We've been working on it. Sorry, I have a kind of fancy stand that my camera is on, meaning it's 3 face mask boxes, and that it's on, and I just knocked over my boxes, and so anyhow, yeah, I'm not in my office, and so we make do with what we have, right? And so that's how it is. We're creative. We've been actually working on as part of our strategic planning, trying to figure out what the parity looks like, starting with our school district, our USD teachers. We have partnerships with our school districts, and so we have licensed teachers in our classrooms that have USD kids. And so what does parity look like? And so our CFO actually pulled together a spreadsheet that I shared with, I think I shared with the cabinet and some others or whatnot, in terms of the dollars or whatnot. And what we tried to look at when it was parity was not just the pay, but the fact that they don't have summers off if they work with us. And whereas they have summer off if they work for the school district. So how much would it be to actually pay them for the additional, 2 months that they're going to work through the summer? And how much in terms of like the company paid retirement, or how much towards company paid insurance or whatever. And when we annualized, when we compared the USD 259, which is Wichita Public Schools, and USD 260, which is Derby Public Schools, so those are the two districts that we partnered with. If we were to actually consider their base pay at 245 days a year, which is how many days, we're open, their step pay, in terms of anniversaries, the company paid retirement, the health insurance, the annualized wage and benefit value was $66,000 a year. Preferred a lead teacher. Well, our licensed teachers don't make $66,000 a year, right? And so, but it was just interesting to kind of look at it from that perspective when you look at just the fact that, we have summers where they don't work, and we do. And so we're going to pay them, for that. That upped, the pay, a pretty considerable amount. And so it was kind of an interesting project to do. Now we're trying to figure out, but also how do we compare ourselves to just the world, not just early childhood education. My daughter just got a job making pizza, and she makes $15 an hour. And she's 18, she's 19 tomorrow, and she's making $15 an hour making pizza, and our starting pay is not $15 an hour. And so, so it just kind of goes to the bigger issue is how do we compete, raise the quality of the workforce and pay within our field, and then compete with what's happening outside of our sector, outside of early childhood education.
And I think we also need to take a look at just what the cost of living is in any particular area of the state. It's going to vary, of course, across the state, and so will the pay parity, because the school districts will pay differently in Eastern Kansas than they do in Western Kansas. All of that would have to be calculated.
This is a great conversation. So Kelly had put in the chat about a cost calculator. So Simon Workman, who is sort of a national sort of fiscal expert, I guess I would say, on B-5 costs, is helping build a Kansas specific cost of quality care calculator. It's a complicated tool that I think still has some bugs in it. I will check with some of my peers who are working with Simon to figure out where is that at, and could he potentially come do a presentation to this working group. I know that we had communities reaching out, trying to figure out at a local level. I think a lot of communities are trying to solve this at a local level to say, what do we need? What is that magic number we need to aim for? So I'd be happy to kind of bring that back to this group as a tool to arrive at a figure. Riva, can you clarify for me, when you talk about percentage of a subsidy, are you talking about, when you use the word subsidy, what are you kind of talking about there?
So in my head, it's like, we know that families can't afford to pay the full cost of quality, but they're part of the equation. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, what is the percentage of the gap between what parents can pay and the resources needed? I don't know if it's a dollar amount per child. I don't know if it's a percentage of budget, but with programs being, all different shapes and sizes, I'm just trying to figure out, what does that what does that gap look like? What kind of a subsidy would be needed? And where my head went was, we have had in the past employer-sponsored childcare programs where they were, pretty upfront with they subsidized 30% of the cost of operation. So I am just trying to figure out, what is that magic number? Is it 30%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? I feel like we have to have a target. And I don't know how to get there, but that's my question.
That's awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. And Amy, I am capturing all of these that you're putting in here too. Build Back Better noted, I think part of this has to be what is the percentage of family share that we actually want, because that drives, I think, the gap is, do we want to have a cap on what families actually pay? 7%, I think, is the number that's been floated as no more than 7% of income. And obviously it goes down from there depending on their income. So if you're below 250% of federal poverty level or state median income, that you would not pay anything. So I think there's different scales out there that we could look at to layer in. And Amy, you might be putting some of these in here too. So
I think Simon might be able to help us with this a lot, just from what I'm remembering of that presentation he did to show what the cost calculator could do. But Marifa, like what I'm envisioning is providers would be able to use this tool and put, here's how many kids I have. Here's, what my tuition is that I don't want to go over this. I want to keep it at this. Here's what my operating costs are. Here's what my staff makes. Here's what I want my staff to make. And then it would spit out this number like, here's what you need to get to that level that you don't have in your operating costs. And if we could maybe get that figure for everyone, which would be a lot, but then we could kind of know, okay, maybe here's the average percentage we're looking at that needs to be subsidized. And here's how much we're going to need approximately to be able to do all that subsidy.
other conversation, thoughts on this? Does this feel, sorry, go ahead, Reva.
So are we getting too big for the scope of this work group? I mean, I know we have to dream big, but I guess I'm just throwing that out there. Are there some baby steps we need to take in between, or is this the big goal that we need to shoot for? I don't know.
I was just going to comment. This is Jennifer. I was just going to make the same comment. Like, is this where that work needs to happen, or is that happening at a different level? And if it is, then is there a piece of that we should be working on?
I really like coming to this group because I don't have the expertise that you all do in the room with childcare, but I always have these big ideas and think, oh, this is how I think it should work in my mind. And then I come here and you guys are like, no, can't work that way. But I am envisioning this whole, like the workforce registry and then the career pathway and the wages program all working together. And we need those things. So if, we have this career pathway and we've got levels 1 to 8 and somebody's a level 4 early childhood educator, this is how much they make. So then if you want to be in this wages program, you enroll in it and you put your stuff in the calculator and say, I have a 3, I have a 2, I have a 1 working for me. And then the program will be able to say, okay, this is how much we're going to subsidize you. So kind of like an optional, you can enroll in this if you want to, but you need to be part of the workforce registry and part of the career pathway to do that. But we also, just to even get started on all this stuff, there's several things that need to be finished, like the workforce registry needs to happen, the career pathway needs to happen. And we do kind of need this data we're talking about, like even how much would we need to put in there? So I think maybe something that this group could do would be to kind of tackle, or maybe not tackle, but start looking into how do we get to that number of even how much money we're going to need before we start talking about possible ways to fund it, which I have some ideas about that too, but it probably won't be that popular. But maybe we could have Simon come and we can look at this calculator. We can talk about how we can get people to, go in and complete that, and how can we get to that number? Sorry, Amy, I think I kind of.
No, you're fine. I was just gonna say, I like your thought process there, that I would like to hear from Simon, because I'm not familiar with them, I don't think. And if we kind of like what we're hearing, that maybe we can make a recommendation, maybe some funding could be found that we could say, we're not going to do all this stuff ourselves, but that we would like to make a recommendation that some group of people that have the skills and the technology to create a calculator like this and to gather this data, that somebody else do this work, and then that generate these numbers that we would like to have, so that we can put it into all the other pieces Kelly just laid out.
So a couple of thoughts. I think, one thing when we think about this calculator, I think it's important for us to think about individuals that we're recruiting, individuals into the workforce versus program, thinking about those. So a family childcare versus a center-based program and how those might be used. I'm just thinking about the way that, really we would need to think through unintentional consequences of having something like this. I think this is definitely something for us to work for and very aspirational. To think about how we make this happen, I would really suggest, both for, as we talk about getting a sense of where people are at now with the wages, again, going back to, and we talked about it a bit, about doing an assessment using potentially when we get out the one-time bonus, how we can think through what we would want to ask the workforce now as part of that. And then as part of this work, as we're thinking about how could this be integrated into the workforce development the registry, and how those tools might integrate with each other. So thinking about it kind of at a higher level, maybe not specifically doing the work, but as we think about the registry, and as that's the RFP and it's the rollout, how can this type of work, how can we ensure that this type of work is integrated into that?
I do like the question about how does this align or with the child care, is it the system improvement team? Is that I do like that, because even in listening to some of the recommendations, I wonder if we're having the same conversations, and if we need to kind of join forces. Not saying that we have to, I'm just thinking out loud, and that, I want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts in our group discussions. And so how do we make sure that we're in alignment, but we're also not, I don't know if it's a good use of everybody's time if we're all talking about the same thing in two separate groups, so I don't, but I think that it's important that we keep talking. And so what's the most efficient way, to be able to do that? And maybe we are two totally different groups, but I did see the question there. And so I thought that was a good question.
It is a good question, Cornelia. And I was, I don't go to SIT team all the time, but I've been in a few of their meetings and presented on them and seen their recommendations. And while wages is on everybody's mind, like they aren't having this specific conversation. They're talking about things like a toolkit for providers and how do we get a group of contractors that will do all of our first aid training, that so people won't have to pay for it, and regulations and things like that. They are not having this conversation. I know Patty's on the workforce advisory group. So Patty, maybe you can talk about if that conversation is happening in that group.
Yeah, and my comment there was regarding the SIT team, and of course, you know, the purpose with the SIT team is, my understanding is, it's specific to regulation and around you know, these conversations around regulation. I can tell you though, as a member, it is difficult to keep all the conversations separate because, you know, these are happening in multiple spaces as well. And I know I have a couple here on here as well that are part of the SIT team and the Workforce Development Advisory Group. Which it's not a bad thing that conversations are happening in more than one space. That would also not be a good thing if we were having completely different conversations. But you know, at times there is definitely overlap.
I think that's a good, we can certainly share back some notes from some of the SIT meetings to walk through like the purpose of the working groups there. To Kelly's point, wages is everywhere. It's on everyone's mind. But to my knowledge, there is not a working group focused on a wage plan or a wage scale or a compensation plan, or I know it's being talked about as we think about the different funding sources, as we thought Build Back Better might have a chance back in the fall. I know conversations geared up around how to improve wages. And so it's not that there are not ideas out there. I just think that there is not a governance group currently in place who is tackling that specific issue from a deliverable standpoint, is what I would say. Does it mean it's the right one for this one? I think that's for you all to decide, if that makes sense. I think the panel overall is the most broad looking governance group in the early childhood governance chart that I see. Its charge is the broadest of all of the working groups. To Patty's point, the SIT focuses on licensing. If it's not, it doesn't have a connection to licensing directly, that's nice. Let's give that off to somebody else. And I think you could say the same for the Workforce Development Advisory Group, which is really diving into workforce issues. And I know they have some subgroups that are focused on some very specific things related to competencies, related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have the home visiting group, which is obviously what it is focused on. So I think the panel has an opportunity, but certainly want you guys to feel like you have the right size piece of the puzzle and the right size chunk to bite off with your time here.
I think it might be great also for, you know, we're talking about hearing from Simon, and I know that we only have till July before we maybe make shifts, but I think it might be great to maybe hear from somebody in North Carolina or a state that has a really strong wages program to maybe come talk to us about how it's structured in their state, or we can send somebody off to do research and bring us back plans of what's happening in other states if we want to go that route. But it always kind of helps me to hear actually how things are working in other states. And I just know, you know, the governor visited North Carolina a few years ago, and they were very impressed with all the work they've done there. And it seems like it's a really good model that they have in that state.
Well, and to that point too, I believe the Start Young work in Kansas City, it's not a wages, it's not the official wages thing, but it's a wage supplement program. So they may also have some, you know, some insights.
Can I speak to that one for a minute? right here. So I've done a little bit of, looking into this. And for those of you who might not know, there is an official wages program that Reba just mentioned. And we have to pay, somebody has to pay a certain amount of money to be able to use their official wages program, which is a downside, but it's, well thought out, and there are some upsides also. Then there are other places like Start Young and other states that have used something similar, but not specifically through the official wages program. And just briefly, when I looked through, was comparing some states that were doing their own thing, I particularly liked Oklahoma's version. Just throwing that out there. It's been a couple months since I've really dug into that, so I just thought I would give you a little bit of what I know about it. I'll see if I can find Oklahoma's and put it in the chat.
We don't have to solve everything today. I think this was a good conversation. I will compile some of these resources and shoot them out to you guys in a document, so you can just maybe peruse some of the links and see if anything strikes you as a thread we may want to pull. And then I will work to get an update on the cost calculator that Simon is working on related to Kansas, and see where that's at, and see if either he or somebody else is available to come to the next panel meeting and share the specifics of what is intended to do, where it might be at in the process. And see if that's something that we want to better understand, and maybe there's some other connections that having knowledge of that work will spur for this group. But I think Debbie made the point, the idea that we have to have some kind of formal deliverable or recommendation. We don't need to put that pressure on ourselves, that we can continue to have really good conversations. You guys can bring work that you're focused on or that you're hearing at a local level to this working group as well, again, to make good use of your time. So I think if that sounds good, we'll leave it at that, and we'll kind of pick this conversation back up in April. And is there anybody who might want to share a little bit out as we go back to the full group? A brave soul.
I'll share if you want me to share.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah.
That would be lovely. I would appreciate that. All right, guys.